Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick, and we continue our expectations series today with looking at two players, Mike Green and Nick Samac. Mike Green, obviously the big second-round draft prize of the Baltimore Ravens, and Nick Samac, the seventh-round, somewhat forgotten player from the 2024 draft. Joining me to do that is James Ogden. James, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Ken. How are you?
Great to have you back on air again. James, your moment in the sun with making the Ravens fourth-round draft pick of Teddy Buchanan during the NFL draft. Just very cool to see you be the guy on screen.
Thanks, Ken. It's funny, isn't it? You say it's a dream come true, but it's not. I never thought that would be a possibility. So, but a real bucket list moment, and loved it, and loved doing it with all my friends in the UK Ravens as well. It was amazing.
Very cool. So we've when the Ravens last played in London at Tottenham, we came out and we spent some time the day before, probably 4 or 5 hours in the bar with you guys, and had a lot of fun. And it was great to see you on air. Then you guys, you very much deserve the honor. And I'm jealous as hell, of course, but very good that you got it. Anyway, let's talk some Mike Green here. Actually, no, let's talk some Nick Samac, because we're going to go the undercard first here. And he's entering his second year after a 2024 where he didn't even play a single regular season snap. I don't think he was active for a game, but I might be wrong about that. He might have been active and not played any special teams or otherwise, but he didn't get on the field for a single snap. Most of what he did in the preseason that was good, and he's got a decent PFF grade in the preseason, it really all came on one drive against the Philadelphia Eagles. There was a 15-play drive where he had a few positively graded plays. I record him in an article that's out there still from last year. And, it's not that there's bad. There's just very little information on him at this point to say that he's progressed from where he was at Michigan State to where he is in his second NFL season.
Yeah, there's just nothing really to understand. I'm pretty sure he broke it. If I remember correctly, he broke his leg late in his final season at Michigan State. And so there was, I don't know, maybe there was something about still limited from that. I mean, a broken leg can heal pretty quick enough to play. So, but I'm pretty sure he was never going to unseat Linderbaum. I think they were hoping that he was going to become depth across the interior offensive line, not just at center. But yeah, interesting that he didn't really get anywhere near playing, but then telling that they kept him around. So they must see something in him from a practice perspective. And obviously that small sample size in the preseason was solid. I mean, it was against NFL backups, back of the roster type. So I don't want to get too carried away with what we saw there. I felt like it'd be interesting to see how much his pass protection has developed from the time at Michigan State. When you watch him when I watched him at Michigan State, pretty good run blocker. I think we saw a little bit of that in the snaps against Philly. But beyond that, I was concerned about his pass protection and how he would fare against bigger defensive linemen in the NFL. And obviously, we've got no information particularly on that at this point.
Right. He's a little lean coming into the league at 6'4", 307. They've used him a little bit at center and guard, whether I'm talking 24 or 25 camp. 25 is just OTAs so far, obviously, but he's played a little bit of guard too. The Ravens have a potentially enormous opening coming up next year with Tyler Linderbaum if he moves on. I don't get the sense Nick Samac's at the top of the list to fill that role. In fact, I asked Warhop the question 3 days ago or something at when he was at the podium at camp, and he mentioned two other players. He mentioned Garrett Dellinger, who it did seem like is a reasonable fit for the position, and they drafted him in the 7th round this past year. But the other guy he mentioned was Reed Holsky, who is a not undrafted player from this year, who was a surprise to me.
Yeah, so I don't know anything about Holsky, so that's interesting. Did not watch any of that of Holsky, so that's news to me. I really liked Dellinger, so I did not watch Dellinger pre-draft. I obviously watch a lot of players pre-draft, if anybody knows me, and my coverage of the draft, but I did not watch Dellinger pre-draft. I watched him post draft, and so there's always the challenge of the potential purple tinted spectacles watching Ravens picks post draft. But I really liked Dellinger, and I think the only reason why he dropped the set, I saw a mid round type guy. I think the reason he dropped to the 7th was just the injuries, which was just staggering, the amount of injuries that Dellinger had in his college career. I think for those who don't know, I think he had, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, he had tightrope ankle surgery.
Yeah.
He had surgery on a broken hand. He had an MCL sprain in his knee. And I think he had 2 shoulder surgeries as well. So the guy just had ridiculously, these aren't injuries that were recurring. They were just really horrifically bad injury look. So if he's managed to get rid of that bug, then, this is a guy who was, for me, more of a mid-round type guy from his play on the field. So that it doesn't surprise me that they're interested there in Dellinger. Like potentially they have in the past preferred those bigger type centers. And that's what Dellinger would be it would be a position change for him. But so it's interesting. They're trying to see whether he has that versatility, because obviously, they do want to think about that long term.
The one thing they said about that, Warhop said about him, is that he really liked the Brad Davis offensive lineman. So Brad Davis is the LSU offensive line coach. I didn't know that. I had to look it up myself. He just said, I like the players that come from that offensive line coach. And so they got 2 of them in this draft, Emory Jones and Garrett Dellinger. And, it's a lot of eggs in that basket. They got, the 3 total offensive line picks really shows you the amount of turnover the Ravens have on the line in both the pre-25 UFA group and the post-25 UFA group. That's a big group as well, with potentially Cleveland and Linderbaum, and I'm missing somebody else. Linderbaum, there's one more. So in the final year of his contract. Who am I missing? All right, it'll come to me.
Yeah.
But anyway, they have 3 offensive linemen. They'll potentially be losing again, and they'll need to potentially do that. But let's get back to Samac here, and because Dellinger we actually covered in another show. He had, I think, decent enough footwork. The problem with Dellinger, watching him after the draft, like you did, is that he got over his feet a little too much, and he had some of what John Simpson really I associate with him as being a unbalanced lineman who could occasionally hit the ground because of it. And it wasn't as much of a problem in level 2, where you expect it to be a problem for any lineman. They get lungy there. It was really more at his trying to make first contact at level 1. He was having some problems getting off balance.
Yeah, I saw the same thing, Ken, and that was my concern, I think. And I think that for me is the thing, sort of, long term with him that is potentially going to keep him from being a competent NFL starter. I don't think when I watched this film, I saw a guy who I think I saw a backup, really, and a guy who could hold down a backup job. And there's some value there, I think. But I feel like he's gonna, for the Ravens to really value it, I think he's gonna have to show some versatility to be able to play more than one spot, if he's going to be able to hold down a roster spot amidst this offensive line group, I think.
Yeah, he's a guy who I'm sorry, I started talking about Dellinger again. Samac. Samac is a guy who is very much in competition directly with Dellinger, and in a way, he's got to be better than him because he's a year further along the tenure thing. But anyway, Samac has his own set of problems, but he's a little bit longer. Is one of the things. He's almost 33-inch arms for Samac, which I did not recall that, frankly. But the problem I had with Samac watching afterwards was the trouble with half man moves that he had at the college level. And I haven't, by the way, this is something interesting I would point to. It's kind of a separate point, so just let you respond to that first. But I have not seen Warhop pay the kind of attention to Samac that he has with pretty much every other player. So Carson Vincent is getting an unbelievable amount of coaching. And Garrett Dellinger actually is getting a lot of coaching because he leads with his shoulder in some man blocking drills. And it's like the one-on-one blocking drills. And they really want to see you go hands first, both up, kind of get the guy at the end of the forklift and then lift him up kind of thing. And he's leading with his shoulder a lot. It's really strange to watch. And he keeps telling him not to do it. But it might be a bad habit that he's got. But with the problem is he's given Holsky advice. He's given Hutchinson advice, and some of the guys who would seem less likely to make the team. But one guy who just hasn't gotten a whole lot of advice is Nick Samac. And maybe he likes his play, or maybe he's not that hot on as a prospect, and we are where we are.
Yeah, I think it could be a little bit of that, couldn't it? Because he's very, hear him talk after the draft. He's very high on Vincent, and as you mentioned about the LSU offensive line room, they clearly do like that line. And to be fair, from an LSU perspective, I feel that LSU were asked, that offensive line was asked to do a lot more than some other college offensive lines. So it's sort of you can project them a little bit better to the NFL. The thing with me with Samac that makes me think maybe it is that he just doesn't, it's not as high on the prospect. But I think with Samac, the thing for me was he was quite polished coming out, like especially in the run game. I felt he was quite a polished run blocker. His technique was good. So there's not a whole lot there's a whole lot to coach up. From a that's not me saying he's a he's a world beater. That's me saying that I'm not sure there is as much ceiling there. There is as much room to grow, and maybe why he's not getting as much attention is because of that. But I think it could be just that there's new exciting prospects and it feels like Warhop was more involved in this year's draft process.
Oh yeah, he wasn't around for the 24 draft.
Of course,
Joe D got sick at the beginning of camp, and they hired him. That certainly could be part of it. Well, one of the nice things was Warhop has really taken to Daniel Fa'alele in a big way. He got him cleaned up at the end of last year and got him playing better. And I think that he was Joe D's guy very clearly. And at the very beginning of camp, when Joe D was there, he gave Fa'alele a couple of complete earfuls in terms of what was going on. And that you don't do that with a player you don't have some hope for. You don't waste your time. It doesn't look like he's going to make the team. That's sad. Let's try number 3 here, kind of thing. But he had bought into him anyway. With Samac, you're right. I mean, he certainly wasn't around to be part of that decision making process. And these 3 guys who, if it was anything like Vincent's case, he probably had significant input into the others as well. And Holsky's obviously a UDFA, but I bet he had impact on that as well. Those are guys he's going to be more bought into.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. So for Samac now, quite possible his place is at the top of the practice squad in 2025. I don't think there's a big risk of the Ravens losing him if he starts the year there. And I think he's the kind of versatile player you'd kind of like to have there, and probably not like to have as a 10th man on your roster, particularly when you're in a position where you're forced to have a spot for Carson Vincent, who probably won't see the field this year.
Yeah, I think that's the issue, right? There's just a real logjam at offensive line, and I can't see a way that they keep him on the active roster again, unless he has a spectacular camp and shows out in the preseason and is showing some position versatility, and I just don't expect that. That's not my expectations for Samac. I think I'm the same as you, that he's a practice squad type guy, and they see if he continues to develop, but it doesn't feel like he's a guy that is a priority for the roster right now.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's talk about what's a good season for Nick Samac. What does it look like for you?
I mean, at this point, it is probably practice squad, finds his way at some point onto the field through an elevation, and some sort of fortuitous circumstance where they end up turning to him as a specialist center if Linderbaum goes down, and he gets some backup snaps and shows out a little bit, and then ends up sticking on the active roster and coming back again next year. That feels like the high point for him right now.
that is virtually a duplicate of what I got. So I'm just going to read mine. It's virtually the same. Cut and retained on the practice squad, provides insurance for Linderbaum whether or not he is ever activated at the 53. Injuries during the season may open a spot for him on the IOL. Presence on the on the practice squad helps the Ravens make room for Carson Vincent on the 53. Very important job for somebody to be able to be on the practice squad and be a guy who can stay around for Vincent to be on the 53. Learns the Ravens way to pull and cut off with low angles on the backside. That was a big thing from Matt Skura, by the way. Was when the Ravens do a two-man counter from guard and tackle, that center needs to be able to block at a very low angle back to his left to pick up a trailer, one of the players that's left by the trailers, I should say. And he talked a lot about that when he was on the show one time, and I appreciated that. That was a good bit of inside football if you want to go back and listen to that show that's there. Let's see, what else is there to say? Elevated for one or more games is OL6, remains in the group of options for 2026 after a set of possible departures. Oh, it's Fa'alele. Cleveland, Fa'alele, and Linderbaum are the three guys who might be departing after this year. So log jammed in Ravens offensive line, kind of log jammed in more way than one, because Fa'alele is, for my money, right guard only. And it's rare that you have a player who's a guard or center who can't play multiple positions.
Yeah, and I also think that where we differ slightly is that I don't and maybe you don't think this either, to be fair, because you said this, is that Samac, I think the way he gets on the field is because he's the only other specialist center. I think is
yes, sir. No, I'm in agreement with you on that. I'm talking Fa'alele.
Oh yeah, no, I know. I think I was making the bridge point, which is that Samac, I think, is probably the same. Like, I think when push comes to shove, he doesn't have the versatility in the same way that Fa'alele doesn't. Because I would agree with you. I think he's a right guard. I think that's where he's going to stay. And I also think there's a world where it'll be interesting to see. I felt like one of the things that Warhop seemed to do with him beyond the technical development was just confidence. Like, he just seemed like a more confident player down the stretch, Fa'alele, and that can be fleeting. So it'll be interesting to see if he can sustain that in the early parts of the season, and then that goes forward. Because if his confidence starts to fall, sorry, this isn't a Fa'alele podcast, but if his confidence starts to falter a little, I can see a way to someone potentially beating him out into that spot. Although the Ravens seem very invested in him right now, and I think it'd be difficult to dislodge him. But there were periods of this season just gone where he was a real weak point on the offensive line that they cannot afford again.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm with you. He certainly played some really lousy football for the first half of the season. In fact, it's really the last 5 games. Recency bias is appropriate in looking at offensive line play. If a guy steps up and does better, I mean, there's a limited total number of games that an offensive lineman will play on his first contract, and it's often limited by his ability to get on the field, and that's limited by his skill once he gets there and some of the mistakes he makes. And Fa'alele has gone through a whole lot of that. If you start over at this point when you got 5 good games out of a guy at the end of last year, I think it's a mistake. I don't think the Ravens will do it. I think that the Ravens have too much potentially to gain from a good Fa'alele. And I don't know where you are on this. I'd be more excited if they actually tried to extend him right now.
Yeah, right now I think it probably would make sense given that what the cost would be at this point. I don't think 5 good games astronomically increases his cost, so it would probably be a sensible thing to do right now. And I'm with you. I think the only way he gets dislodged is if it's mid-season before he gets dislodged, because he's had a run of bad games again, and it doesn't look like it's going to turn around. I think that's the only way that happens. I think they will stick with him early and give him a chance to lock it down and show them that the 5 games wasn't a fluke.
Right. All right. What does a great season look like for Nick Samac?
I mean, a great season is Linderbaum goes down for a significant amount of time, and they turn to Samac as the specialist center, and he plays a good half a season and ends up, playing like a mini Tyler. Well, he's not a mini; he's about the same size, but plays like Tyler Linderbaum for half a season. I mean, probably not to the same level. I think it would be slightly below that. I can't see Samac having the same ceiling that Linderbaum has, but certainly not in the open space either, but that he's a serviceable version of Linderbaum for the Ravens down the stretch, and then he would definitely be on the active roster and would be a candidate for extension probably. So you're in a that. I cannot see that happening. That's a bit too optimistic of me, and that's maybe not a great season. That's a bit of a pie in the sky season.
Yeah, so I said it at the 80th percentile, and I'm following your logic there. I had it a little lower. Earns a roster spot at some point in the season with a combination of good practice and OL attrition. Active some but not all weeks. Plays sparingly as a reserve and sixth offensive lineman. I'm not even 100% sure he'd get the center role if it came open. So if they're going to try out two guys and it's Dellinger and Holsky, I mean, it could be one of them, but it could still mean Samac gets elevated and he gets the roster spot. But he plays 30 to 150 snaps in relief. I just say if he's playing at center, and that's where I think he would be, his snap accuracy is good enough, and any time at center shows enough in terms of other fundamentals that a path can be seen to a solid backup career offensive lineman. I'm certainly not saying his play is at the league average level or anything like that, but just that it flashes almost the wrong word, that he demonstrates enough in terms of fundamentals to that he could be a solid backup lineman going forward.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the only shot he has to get the go if Linderbaum goes down is if these other guys who are, I mean, obviously they're either UDFAs or they're a projection to the center position, don't quite work out. Like, it doesn't look like it's going to work in camp, and it looks like these guys aren't going to be versatile enough to play the center position, which is a long shot in and of itself, because I imagine Dellinger will probably show the ability to play that position, but maybe there's a disaster from snapping perspective, and it's you don't know what could happen. So I'm with you. I don't necessarily think he would get the first shot in that situation, but he would have to have a few things happen for him to get on the field, I think.
Kind of maybe an upside for what he could be is maybe a Tristan Colon, be another undrafted guy, played center guard, never spectacularly, at least with the Ravens, and still was a guy that there was value there.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's move on. Talk a little bit about Mike Green, the 59th pick out of Marshall, Sun Belt Player of the Year, the NCAA sack leader, and a whole eye of the storm in terms of controversy. I'll just say being there for the first media day that Mike Green faced the not the draft, the post-draft media, but the media at rookie camp, actually it was at. The questions just kept coming about the incidents, just in very slightly different forms. And you could see him get a little more upset with these questions as they continued, a little more impatient about them.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? You try and read as much about it as you can, but there's very little information beyond speculation about what happened, and I presume we're here to talk about his play on the field. It's a tough one to relitigate. I'm not necessarily gonna do.
I don't want to either. I was so excited when the Ravens picked him, in terms of them getting a player his caliber. So anyway, if you don't know this about Mike Green had a 685 3-cone, which is in that freakish level that you'd probably love to have if you were a slot corner. And the only guy I think who I've ever heard of being better at the edge position is Hutchinson from a few years ago. Aiden Hutchinson was like a 669 or 667 or something. Just amazing. 28 bench reps. There's nothing wrong with that. The guy's really built. When you see him, and he's quick and he's twitchy. Even runs himself out of some plays, which you'll sometimes see if you think back to who's a good Jared Allen, being a guy who was known for running himself out of plays a lot. But he's the Ravens have had him at both sides, playing Sam and Mike this preseason already, which is something very exciting. And the other day they ran a naked bootleg, and Mike Green dropped into what is frankly open space between the level 1 receiver and the level 2 receiver and picked the ball off. And I think it was more of a bad play by Devin Leary, but it was still the place went wild with Mike Green hysteria.
It does not surprise me that he can do that. You didn't see him do it very much at Marshall, but it does not surprise me that he can do that given the way he moves on the field. And getting it when you got a chance to watch him in the Senior Bowl practices and you can see him in a bit more space, you sort of understood that definitely was a possibility for him to be able to do that. And it actually made him, for me, it made him more interesting from a Ravens viewpoint, actually, that he would be able to do that.
Yeah, just 23 coverage snaps in the last 2 seasons. Only 4% of the pass snaps he dropped to coverage. But I always look at that in college prospects and say very hard time identifying Sam guys because they're needed as pass rushers. They're the best pass rushers on their team if they're NFL prospects, and so they don't generally do that very often. Zach Vaughn, going back a few years, was a guy who dropped a lot, but they're
yeah, no, they don't do that. I also thought when I watched him, obviously I watched him pre-draft and wrote a full profile on him. I felt like he could play the rush position for the Ravens, that there's enough power in him to be able to do that. But the versatility is very helpful. And they've used that over recent years. Like they like to move guys that they do like to have the versatility. Of course, they've got the guys to sort of pigeonhole guys who can't necessarily do that, but they also have guys who they can move around and they quite like that.
Yeah, the guys on either side, the guys who got to play either side, there certainly have been some of them. When they had Judon and Bowser together, and they also at times would have a third pass rusher who could go. I mean, they had a lot of coverage flexibility that created additional flexibility in the rush, which was great. And either of those guys could line up off ball as well. And I think I could see that from Green too. Green is a guy who certainly has a lot of that twitchiness, the kind of pick your gap at the time kind of skill. I don't have any problem at all. You mentioned going up directly against a left tackle on typically it'd be a left tackle on the rush side, the naked tackle side. I wouldn't have any trouble seeing him doing that regularly. He forces oversets to such a degree with his quickness that he makes left tackles very susceptible to counters. In fact, I would almost see him more as like a Yannick Ngakoue type, a guy who would really love the further outside the better in terms of where he's coming to make sure that he's on an island with one big lumbering tackle.
Well, and that's the beauty of the agility testing, right? Which is that when you watch him on film at Marshall and then at the Senior Bowl, he uses it, he deploys it quite expertly to be able to keep that offensive lineman off balance, to get the offensive lineman to compromise the half man. Like he is exceptional at that. The thing for me that I love about Green, especially given the recent picks that the Ravens have made at the edge position in the draft, is that he knows how to win. Like this is not a guy who is coming in unpolished where you're going to have to teach him how to plan to rush the passer. He knows what he's good at, and he knows how to win. And that to me is a real, like, I'd like to see some, we can get into it. I'd like to see some additional stuff that he's able to, like, in college. When I came out of watching the Marshall film, and I watched him before the Senior Bowl. And when I came out of watching the Marshall film, I thought, like bit of power in his pass rush, plenty in decent power as a run defender, but some power in his pass rush. I just didn't see loads. I didn't see loads on film in terms of coming through a guy. And then he goes to the Senior Bowl and proves that is definitely a part of his game. A very small sample size, but some of the speed to power at the Senior Bowl was scary. And obviously he put the famous rep where he put Josh Connolly on his back, and then they replayed the rep, and then he beat him inside as well. So like that was special, and so you started to see that maybe there is something there too. And so I'm really excited. I am excited by how excited Chuck Smith is about him, because I think there are some things that he's going to be able to unlock to add some little nuance, some little extra things to his pass rush, and to marry that then with the way he plans his rush and the way he uses his feet with his hands. That the sky's the limit for this kid, really, I think.
Yeah, he's Chuck Smith has said this camp or this OTA session so far that he had a lot of good things to say yesterday. The interview, by the way, really worth watching, because he praises Zach Orr for really being the guy who turned around the defense. He said, if you're giving the credit to Pease, essentially, you're giving it to the wrong guy. And, it wasn't the people they brought in. It was Zach getting up in front of you and getting in front of the players. But anyway, the other thing he said I thought was really interesting. He said every player, every pass rusher needs to have a skill. So what he's really talking about, I think, is a go-to move for their body type, that fits and that works in their system. I mean, Mike Green might come to the Ravens. Like, he's probably not quite Kyle Van Noy in terms of his toolkit, but he has a tremendous toolkit. And Owe has a few tools, but I think Green has more right now. And the funny thing is, I mean, if you will have to polish them at the NFL level, they're going to have to get better. But he is a guy who has really done it all in terms of being able to apply that thing. And so your comment about knowing how to win is well taken, I think.
Yeah, and it's the things I saw him use most, which I think the Ravens fans will see him use most, is a very effective cross drop that was lethal at times, and a wicked spin move sometimes. Occasionally saw him slightly overuse that, and against better offensive linemen, sort of they sat on it a little bit, but that was rare. And you saw, so he's just very effective with when he is using his hands in the middle of his rush. Like it's accurate, it's powerful, it's fast, and whatever he's sort of choosing to do, whether it's a club type move or it's a two-hand swipe type move, it's always accurate, it's always violent, and it's very difficult to keep him blocked. It's just really difficult to do that. And then we haven't even talked about his finishing, which I think is probably the best part of his game.
Yeah. He hasn't been the greatest tackler in college, which is funny, but he is a good finisher. And even with subpar length, which is one of the things you'd look at in Green and say that might not translate to the NFL. He's 32-inch arms, which is it's certainly shorter than your average top flight pass rusher. And Owe is 34 and change, I think. He's very long armed. But Mike Green really doesn't have any problem with I think extending his tackle radius by ankle tackles. It must be grip strength. That's what I would account for it. But if he gets his hand on your ankle, you're down, is what it seemed to be.
Yeah, he definitely did, didn't he? I think it's funny. He's I'm sure you were you mentioned in your notes that the sort of high, actually, I'll let you talk about that for a second, and then I'll come back on it. The high conversion rate that he has from pressure to sack.
Oh, okay. I mean, real briefly, it's probably not sustainable, but he had he was 11th in pass rush productivity of 408 edge players who had at least 200 rush snaps. So that's 97th percentile. That's terrific. And obviously if any of you are close to that in the NFL, it'll be fantastic. But his finish rate, which is the sacks and the quarterback hits divided by his total pressures, that's how I define it. I don't think anybody else is using that, is 46%, which is in the 86th percentile. That's not sustainable. So at the NFL level in particular, he's just going to get more pressures than he gets finishes on that, but still could be very effective.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me is that his like I absolutely accept your point that it won't be sustainable at that level. I do think it's going to be high. It may not get to that level, but I think what I see from him on film is the fact that the way he corners is probably the best thing about his pass rush for me. His bend and his dip. And then the explosion that he has to the quarterback after he's managed to do that, he's a special athlete, and that allows him to finish at the rate that he does. And the other thing I would say, I think, is that one of the other reasons for it is that explosive first step, and actually in some ways his second and third step when he's clean is even more impressive than his first step. And so it's the thing that I'm most excited about to see him at the NFL level is how quickly he gets pressure. He is made for the NFL, for this NFL because of the way he wins, and he's gonna he is going to get. I think he is going to get a lot of sacks just because of that, and on its own, really, that he's just he this stuff is not like slow developing long moves. He's winning straight off the snap and putting quarterbacks in trouble. Oh, you're on mute, Ken.
When he does that at the NFL level, obviously some of that is going to be against more mobile quarterbacks, more evasive quarterbacks who are going to have the ability to move around a little bit in the pocket. And I still say that kind of player is tremendously valuable for his first pressures alone, even if he doesn't, have a enormous conversion rate. And, I'm not talking, it doesn't have to dip way off the charts, but Oweh was at 50%, and his close rate last year scares me because his pyramid is not broad enough at the bottom in terms of pressures to support his sack total. So, and for his quarterback hit total in general. But Green, I think, it could be a enormous pressure guy who brings back Matabike or Travis Jones as a creates sacks for them, creates sacks for whoever's on the opposite edge, could even create sacks for an inside linebacker who's blitzing when you have the other edge dropping to cover. For example, the Ravens still do a lot of 4-man rushes, so you still have to figure out who's not coming on a lot of these. But he's so quick, and the Ravens have not had a guy like him. Really, I'm trying to think. I mean, Suggs is not that guy. He was, tremendous power rusher in terms of what Suggs is, but in terms of a dip guy, they got the tail end of Yannick Ngakwe's career. That would be maybe the closest thing they've ever had. They got Jadeveon Clowney is really more of a power guy. I'm trying to think of who really meets the standard of quickness that the Ravens have. Michael McCrary would be the guy.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be cool. The guy I really struggle. I've been doing these. I did this year in my draft guide. I did these drafted Raven comps for players, and really struggled with some. I think there was one we talked about in the offensive line that was absolutely ridiculous, and you could never make it fit really. But I couldn't find a guy that fit for the guy. And with Mike Green, the I think a lot more of him as a prospect, but there's a little bit. People are going to hate this because if you hear this, you're just going to think, wow, he hates the guy. And I absolutely don't. I think he's a much better prospect, and I think he's going to be a much better NFL player. But Sergio Kindle was actually the guy who probably most closely matches his profile and the things he's good at and things. But obviously, let's hope he doesn't go anywhere near any stairs.
Yes, yeah, that would be tough. What else to say about him? Didn't think my pre-draft note on him was that sadly he won't be an option at number 27, as he should be going in the first 20 selections. If he drops, they'll run the card and he'll start his NFL career at Sam and as a pass rush specialist. The Ravens had a chance to draft him at number 27, didn't do it. They passed like everybody else. And I think it's interesting the way that Eric DaCosta has alluded to it developing, that their worry was that the Kansas City Chiefs were going to get him cheap.
Yeah, and that was definitely a possibility. It's one of the things that makes, I know we're not talking about it. It's one of the things that makes me more nervous about the off field is that he was clearly off most teams' boards, like pretty much everybody's board, because if you had him on your board, you're taking him in the second round. Like there's that, like that, in the same way that the Ravens did. Like if you had him on your board, I can see you're not taking the risk in the first round and hoping that he'll fall, but then you take him in the second, no questions asked, because of the talent. I don't think anybody's doing a kind of cost benefit analysis of making him a third or fourth round pick rather than a second round pick. He's still you still get the same type of headache of drafting him if that's the thing that you're worried about. You sort of from a PR perspective, you're worried about that. Then you draft him, you take him in the second round because of the talent. So virtually every team had him off their board, because virtually every team passed on him a second time, which is an interesting thing from the character perspective.
That's a really good point, though, because I think there are some organizations who consider that a binary choice, that the guys are 1 or 0 for the entire draft. They just cannot have him because they can't take the risk on the PR nightmare. And it's not a good time to be taking that risk for the Ravens after the Tucker situation occurred. Clearly, it's a little bit risky pick, but I think the Ravens had a 50 Shades of Gray in here, that they thought, yeah, well, it's a dangerous pick in the first round, and there the risk maybe outweighs the reward. But I think you're right on the money to say that that's how they made that choice. Is they said, okay, it's enough of a value now that it's worth the risk that's in. And frankly, I prefer that. The Ravens' old black dot system, which they had a medical black dot on for Arthur Jones, and they drafted him anyway in the 5th round because the risk then, overcompensated for the reward overcompensated for the risk.
Yeah, and the thing for me with Green was just that, like, the talent was so great that you just can't, if you are comfortable with him as a person to the point where you would draft him, the second round, you have to take him in the second round. There's just there's no question. I can understand not doing it in the first round on the first night and all of that, but in the second round, you have to run the card up at that point if you're comfortable with him as a person. Obviously, there's just a lot of stuff to get to be comfortable with him as a person, and it's difficult being an NFL fan in this day and age with some of the stuff that comes out. The best case. The best case scenario here with Mike Green is something a little bit questionable, but okay, really. The worst case scenario is something a lot worse than that, and the worst case scenario will be something that comes up again if it is the worst case scenario. Like, the Ravens are going to have that again, so it was a strange one for them to do it. That, as much as I think I was on the stream at the time of the pick, and as much as I was sort of wow at the pick, a lot of the wow was, wow, I can't believe they took that guy with what's going on right now.
I think maybe one of the very interesting components is they love this guy as a player, not as a not in terms of the talent. That's evident to everybody on the tape. In terms of the attitude and the work ethic, and he's one of the things that Chuck Smith said is he always runs to the ball. And he made a great comment. He said, you should not have to coach effort at this level. And, a lot of players, you still have to tell them, hey, get after it, get on the ball kind of thing. And you just don't have to tell Mike Green that. And the other thing they talked about was his coachability. He asks a ton of questions and comes around. They did Tavius Robinson, who apparently is, he's got like a perfect attendance record going that I didn't know about, but he's never missed a practice apparently. And Harbaugh went a whole long of streams. Like Harbaugh, there's a lot of coach speak. He's doing real well. We're struggling for consistency. But there's always the common thread of that player has a great future and he's headed in good places. With Tavius Robinson, he basically got into his poetic kind of discussion about the guy and said, the guy never misses a meeting, never misses a practice, never's late for anything, never misses a meal, he finished with. And when he says that, he's obviously trying to make you remember all that other stuff. It's not a mistake. I mean, he's got a very Starman-esque kind of quality about him in terms of being an impressionistic communicator. It's a very clever way to get it done. But anyway, they love Mike Green. It's very clear from that perspective. I think it would be not impossible that this kind of thing would come up, but the problem with Tucker was he probably was touching the stove and had never been burnt by it. And the guess of Green, he knows a lot of the things, and he can talk to other NFL players and the rookie camp and whatnot, the NFL rookie symposium or whatever. They still have that, I think, about, hey, what are some things you need to do when you meet a young lady? What are normal behavioral things? They may have, individual interview times and whatnot for players to do that. It's something he'll need to really learn at the NFL level.
Yeah. And I think there's a practicality right to it. I mean, from what is in the public domain, it is pretty clear the type of person Justin Tucker is. Like, it's pretty difficult to argue against it from what's in the public domain. And that is all we're ever going to get, I think, in terms of what we have now is all we're ever going to know. And so you have to sort of judge on the balance of probability there. Mike Green is a different situation entirely. There are two specific instances that have some potential factors around. And if you Google enough and read enough, you can kind of understand that there are potentially some things that you can make sort of help yourself feel better about the fact that he's playing for your favorite team, because there may be some extenuating circumstances in both instances, but that's rumor and conjecture, and we're never going to really know. So it's a tough one to. Anyway, As a player on the field, I just wanted to comment on what you'd said as well, is that he's a very high processor. Like, this is the thing that I loved about him, especially against the run, because he isn't the heaviest set guy in terms of, like, he's bulky. You can see that on film, and you've sort of confirmed from seeing that in person. But in terms of being thick in the pants, that's not what this guy is. But he is powerful enough. He plays with really good play strength because of the leverage he plays with. But the other thing that helps him against the run is his intelligence and the way he diagnoses the run, which I felt he did very well in college, albeit in the Sun Belt against not necessarily the most sophisticated offenses he was facing. But I felt he did a really good job of that. And I think you could tell on film that he was coachable and was a guy who is spending time in the film room and understanding what he's seeing, because he played fast against the run as well as playing strong against the run.
Now, we watched what the Ravens did last year with Owe and Van Noy both. At the end of the season, basically, they put them in bubble wrap and weren't having those guys on the field for first down. They basically, Tavius Robinson was good, so it wasn't a problem with that. He was really holding down that rush side for early downs most of the year. But then they were suffering a little bit having Malik Harrison on the field as a Sam linebacker. And they stayed with that. And they also gave Ajabo some snaps and whatnot. So they were not optimally constructed, I'm going to say, last year in terms of early down Sam linebacker play. But it was a situation where they kept their pass rushers in bubble wrap because they only had two of them that they really liked. If this year were to play out, even without an injury, I still see Mike Green as being on the field pretty much exclusively for passing downs. I think they want to keep him rested, and I think they want to, first of all, learning to play the NFL run game. It's not like it's a whole different scheme and whatnot, but the Ravens have a fairly high set of expectations for their edge defenders in terms of what they want. And I think that they really want him to be a rested pass rusher. And I think that's how he can basically help the Ravens most this year.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see whose snaps he takes, because he's definitely going to take some snaps. He's not going to take, I don't think maybe he'll steal some of the frontline guys' snaps. Like, maybe he will steal some. Maybe they'll roll back Van Noy snaps a bit just because of the age and try and he'll take some of that. I don't know that they're going to roll back that much on Tavius Robinson snaps. So, there's a chunk of 400 to 500 snaps that he's going to take. And you've got 600-ish from Van Noy and Owe. So you're starting to say where, like, he's going to have to eat away at some of those I think he's going to eat away at some of those frontline guys' snaps.
I got the answer for you.
Is it Ajabo?
Yeah, it's Ajabo. Ajabo's not going to make the team. So he played 262 snaps last year. That's a good chunk of snaps. Harrison played 137. So you got 400 available to him right there. Yeah. And then you've got Isaac, you had Yannick Ngakoue played 82 snaps for the Ravens last year. But you do have Adisa Isaac. He's going to come back and he's going to play some. Right?
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure that we see an increase in snaps from any of the big three. So Owe, Robinson, and Van Noy played a combined, and this is, I take out the penalties in my snap totals here, but it's, roughly 1,550 snaps, maybe almost 1,600. Between those three, I'm not sure you have to see an increase in those. The Ravens kind of probably like the rest. They probably like the rest for Van Noy. Some of them might not be healthy the whole year, so you got multiple considerations that could reduce that number. And even though I do think the Ravens will stay away from rush nickel this year because they had so much success with Travis Jones being on the inside with Matabike, I still think that you probably have your snaps in place right there in terms of who he's taking him from.
Yeah, I think he'll be a Jabbo too. The thing that, as you mentioned, I think the complicating factor is Adisa Isaac, who they do seem to like a bit, and so I think some people are going to have to kind of roll back a little bit on those snaps. But because I think the challenge is going to for the Ravens is that I think Mike Green is. I suspect later into the season, Mike Green is going to play himself into a slightly bigger role, and they're going to find it difficult to keep him off the field. And so then you've got to start to look at how you can be a bit creative, but it's a very, very good problem to have, especially down the stretch. Like that'll be a really good problem to have.
I literally,
I was going to say a problem akin to 2012 when they had a number of guys that they could roll out there and rush the passer.
well, if you're much better off having too many than too few, obviously, and injuries will sort that out for you. But the Ravens have not, they have typically carried 5 outside linebackers, which is why I think that they really have to trade Ajabo if their depth holds up. If everybody stays healthy, Isaac doesn't have any recurrence of hamstring problems or, any also Isaac has to kind of play himself back with live fire to a similar level. So it's not that he would, I don't think he's in any jeopardy of losing his spot to Ajabo, but I think he could start the season on IR or something if he's, behind the game. But if he isn't, then I think that Ajabo is probably going to be traded before the end of camp or released at the end of camp if there's no takers. And then they'll go with 5. Now, the interesting thing is they have not typically been activating 5 on game day. So it'll be Green and Isaac are both highly incented to be good special teams players this year because that'll determine a lot about who's active. I don't think Green is going to sit because of it, but in particular in Isaac's case, he needs to figure out how he replaces another inside linebacker on the active game day roster so he can get OLB reps.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think both of them, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out because I think both of them will be able to play on special team. Like this isn't going to be like Tavius Robinson running down the field on kickoff. It's Mike Green and Adisa Isaac are both going to be able to do that with their athleticism. Yep. So I do think it'll be interesting to see how that plays itself out. But I'm with you, I think, in the sense of that's how it ends up. And I think at the end of the day, we probably see, and I know we're going to talk about expectations, but I think we probably, in terms of snap count, I think we probably see Green hit the sort of 400-ish snap count in this first year.
I'm right there with you. And I think at 400 snaps, he could be, and I'm going to look back how many snaps Suggs played as a rookie, but he was a situational pass rusher when he got 12 sacks. And I'll look that up. But while I hear what your good season is for Mike Green.
So I thought about this quite a bit because I do think there's there's a world where I thought about this a bit because I looked at some of the good young pass rushers in the game right now and how many snaps they got in their rookie season and what their kind of production was. And obviously the gold standard, which Mike Green is not going to hit, is Jared Verse from last year. What I would say is my grades, my pre-draft grades for Verse versus Green were very different. I was very high on Verse last year and thought this would be who he was when he came out. And he had a completely open room in LA. And so he could play every snap the defense needed him to play. So, that's not who Mike Green's going to be, and so he's not going to get the same kind of production that Verse did, and Verse's production was staggering, really, as a rookie. So I think you're looking more at a different type of archetype where you're looking at sort of, like I mentioned, 400-ish snaps. You're looking at a guy. What I would hope for him in terms of a good season, if he's on 400 snaps, is a kind of 20 to 25 pressures with a sort of 5 to 6 sack type season. Possibly more if he's able to sustain that high finishing rate that you were mentioning before, where he's able to put together a season akin to Yaya Diaby, who in his first year had 30 pressures and 9 sacks, where he's converting at quite a high level.
That's an absurd level, yeah. Because he's got quarterback hits that go with that would be...
Exactly. So, but he's playing he played a lot more snaps than 400. I think he played like 600 snaps, I think, when I was looking. So there's I think there's a ceiling because of the amount of snaps that Green is going to play. But that I think would be a good season out of Mike Green because I am pretty high on him. So I think that's a good one for him.
Okay, let me go to Terrell Suggs here, 2003. So Terrell Suggs in 2003, and this does not include the penalties, had 400. I'm sorry, this includes the penalties. He had 415 snaps on the season. And he played 206 of those. Well, let's include third and fourth down together. Played 214 of 415 snaps on third or fourth down. The team as a whole, I'm going to give you this number here, played only 277 snaps on third down. So he was on there for almost every one. And so one more time here, 108.9 divided by, the team played 25% of their snaps on third down, and Suggs played over 50% of his snaps on third down. I could see that kind of a role for Green where he's on there on obvious passing downs. Now, this Ravens team, more so than even the 2003 team, which had some leads, plays with the lead a lot. And they try and close out games with the pass rush like the teams of the Lamar Jackson era do, and teams of previous eras have not always done for the Ravens. This is means he might get more early down opportunities where the other team's going to pass anyway. Kind of like if you look back to that 2019 team, they played the 4 outside linebacker, that race car package, on 13% of snaps. They only played their base defense 10% of snaps. So if it's that kind of a situation, I could see Green playing more snaps this year. But I would love it if he had anything approaching Terrell Suggs' rookie year, obviously for overall productivity. I don't think it's out of the question that he has a very high quality pressure year in terms of numbers that would accrue from being on the field on third down more, because they're better opportunities. I mean, if you pin back your ears, you're going to get a pressure rate that should be at a higher level. So you might even be low at 30 pressures would be my point on that. I'd be excited. I have my good year for you. Active for every week of the season, is healthy and plays at least 14 games. Quickness translates to the NFL game. Seamlessly takes on a specialist role and generates good pressure and favorable pass rush situations. No expectation of finish rate, but PRP is 7.0 or higher in 250 plus pass rush snaps. All right. And by the way, 7.0 would make him something like 29th among NFL edges last year. So that put him up there, in very good company.
Yeah, are we good?
All right. How about a great year?
A great year for me is that he starts stealing snaps off people, that he plays early. He plays so well that he ends up playing closer to 600 snaps, and he's playing closer to what the Ravens would probably consider a full-time role right now. I mean, I think there's a chance that he can play more in the future, but that at 600, that is akin to what Oweh and Van Noy have played over the last couple of years. And so he becomes a full-time part of the rotation, and they start to rotate 3 guys rather than rotating 4 or 5. And in that situation, I can see him on more of the, so I said I was looking at young pass rushers. I can see him on more of the accelerated Nick Bonito track, which is Nick Bonito had a bit of a redshirt year in his first year. He's a bit small coming into the league, and then sort of put on some NFL type weight and managed to, in his second season, play closer to 600 snaps and got closer to 50 pressures and closer to 10 sacks. And that is, I think, what we can expect for a great year for Mike Green. And if he has a year like that, you're then talking about him as potentially growing into one of the premier pass rushers in the NFL.
Yeah, I think he'd be immediately in the discussion for the defensive rookie of the year if he had a year like that, and he might win it. I mean, you might have a guy in the secondary always who gets 8 picks as a rookie, so you can't always do it. You might have a guy who gets 15 sacks somewhere else, but that would certainly put him in the discussion. Great season for him. He plays 15 plus games and flashes elite pass rushing skills. The pass rush productivity finish is at 8.0 or higher. That would have been 23rd among all edges in 2024. So again, favorable situations. It would be a really good number. He does have advantages in it, I think, that could make it that good. The Ravens preserve him for pass rushing in games they plan to expand his role in 2026. The Ravens' overall pass rush maintains a pace of approximately 3 sacks per game. He will have a big contribution to that, because the Ravens, I think they're due for a regression in sacks if it weren't for him. And I think that the big chance they have to be as good as they were prior is how much additional first pressure he can generate and what that turns into in terms of sacks, for him certainly, but also for other players. I think there's going to be some of that. Matabike be potentially a big beneficiary from him.
Yeah, I think so too. I think this is the thing that the Ravens I think get out of this is that he has the potential to be a dominant frontline pass rusher that would transform their defensive line and specifically would transform the interior. And that is the thing that gets me most excited, because when you look at the way the Eagles dominated last season and the way the Eagles defeated the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, it was interior pressure from their stable of interior rushers. And you add Mike Green to the mix, you've got guys who can get pressure up the middle quickly, and a guy from the outside who can also get pressure quickly on these quarterbacks that the Ravens need to get pressure on quickly. So it was an exciting addition, an exciting on-field addition in many ways in the second round.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask you one other question, or maybe make a statement that's almost in the form of a question here. Is that the Ravens have a chance with Mike Green, I think, to have a great four-man pass rush. I mean, the 2006, they had a great four-man pass rush. They had almost a 10% sack rate rushing the quarterback with four men. And the years that they have approached that are really the last two, where Chuck Smith has been kind of designing a lot of what was done in terms of the pass rush. Does Mike Green give them the possibility of that, despite, I mean, it's not like they don't have good individual players who are good at one-on-one matchups, and the central guy in Travis Jones, who commands double teams that you better not. He's the I dare you to block me with one guy. But I think this has a chance to be a really great four-man rush.
It completes the picture. Like it gives them a guy like Oweh has turned himself into a really solid NFL player, and he'll get a good contract somewhere, and he'll continue to play in the league at a good level, maybe even continue to improve. But I think what we saw last year is who he is, and who is sort of the ceiling for him. So like that's great, and that's exactly what you need on one side. The other side is Kyle Van Noy, who, has been fantastic for the Ravens, and I'm not decrying Kyle Van Noy, but to put a dominant rusher on the other side of Oweh with Travis Jones and Madubuike in the middle, you're starting to ask real questions of that offensive line to be able to block with four, especially with the type of, I mean, we're not going to go into this, but I'm frustrated about the Ardarius Washington loss, but especially with the type of potential in the secondary, you are looking at a really difficult puzzle for offenses to crack. Especially when the stakes are high in the postseason, when the pressure is high.
Yeah. All right, James, always a pleasure talking football with you. It's great to sit down for an hour. I know we always say we're going to hold it a little shorter. We never do, and that's great because I appreciate the conversation so much. Tell folks where they can follow you or find your work online.
Yeah, you can find me on X at NFL Ogden, writing for Russell Street Report. I have my own site where I publish my draft reports and things, and you can always hear me on the UK Ravens podcast most weeks. But yeah, mostly my stuff is draft stuff, and you'll see that start to come through. I'm obviously in the midst of summer scouting right now, and you'll obviously see the fruit of that work next April. But that's generally where you can find me.
Now, who do you root for among English soccer clubs?
My English soccer club is Manchester City, which is a controversial team to like,
but very dominant in terms of who they've been for the past 2 decades, anyway. Right,
dominant in recent years, but I have been a fan for a very long time and a season ticket holder for a very long time. So I have also been going since I was very young, and going to when City were very, very bad. So I've got credentials there.
Here's my question with regard to Man City. Man City fans, how do they feel about the rise of Wrexham? Is it all like they're a bunch of frauds and whatnot, or how do you feel about it? Also, they tend to be the heels in the Ted Lasso show too, right?
They do. We do tend to be the heels in their talent. We have gone from a team that was probably most people's second team before the takeover to being everybody's favorite team to hate. And Wrexham are that in the lower leagues. Everybody obviously sees all the the stuff that that is put out there on from the documentaries and Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney and stuff. But I think within English football circles, if you're a fan of a team in the lower leagues, you love to hate Wrexham in the same way that you love to hate City. So we feel a bit of a kinship with them, probably.
I felt that. I felt like it's very clear Wrexham's not only becoming the New York Yankees of the league, but they're hated at a whole nother level, because at least the Yankees don't pretend like they're this puritanical small town team. And that's what Wrexham is trying to be, where they've just had incredible dollars funneled into them by the most favorable set of circumstances imaginable. I know
they're both City and Wrexham and other clubs at the top of the top table are symptoms of a massive problem in soccer. And one of the reasons why I love watching the NFL, because of the way that the parity is ensured within the NFL. It's a very, very different thing in soccer, and money controls the game, and it's not a good thing for those people that, like me, that remember supporting my hometown club in difficult circumstances.
All right. Well, very cool. Good to hear that. Other folks out there, hit me up if you have an idea for a film study short. I'll be doing a lot of those in July, a lot of open time before camp starts, and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for all the listens. Please tell that one additional person who hasn't heard this show, tell them about it and tell them to get them to give it a try. Thanks, James, again for coming on.
Thanks, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.